as like the collector side of me wants to know like what's the next great watch, and I don't even really mean in a sense of like
My personal belief?
like underappreciated, undervalued even, because
Okay, so I've learned one thing over the past 10 years. The watch or the watches or the brand or the category of watches that will surprise us in the future is staring us in the face right now. It is blatantly obvious, and it's been obvious. Every single watch that's popped, Omega Speedmaster, not like an uncommon watch. Everybody knew the model, and everybody was like in shock when prices went up. It was like, oh, why didn't I know? Like, how did I not realize that Omegas were like so wildly undervalued? But you have to put things into context. So I think that sometimes the watch that has a great history, was very, very popular at one time, is in a lull, is the one as a collector that you want to be buying. Because as a dealer, we don't really speculate long term. We look at today's market value and we try to make a margin where we buy, sometimes have to service or like clean up a little bit, and then sell a watch and make our spread. But we don't buy and hold long term because it doesn't really make sense for us. If I was to advise a collector, however, I would tell him like, well, look at things that were at one time extremely popular and are right now not so popular, and that's where you should be playing, instead of trying to chase skeleton AP perpetual calendars right now. Probably not like the best investment at the moment because they're really, really hyped. You should probably buy something that's still something popular, but maybe less so right now. So like, what's dipping right now? Gilt dials maybe are a little bit soft at the moment.
Yep.
So is it maybe the right time to buy a gilt dial? Probably. And like, you look at other categories, like the 40s and 50s watches, or like vintage chronographs in stainless steel that used to be at the all-time highest around the start stop reset Phillips auction, are pretty soft right now. Is that a good buy? Probably so. So if I were to advise kind of clients on like, if they're looking for that kind of, I want a pop or like a future kind of potential and things like that, you have to go on a popular but unpopular at the same time. So you're looking for things that aren't dead but are soft.
So just if you get nothing else from this, from our time with Sasha, he says if you spent $250,000 on an AP perpetual skeleton, then you wasted your money. That's what Sasha said it.
No.
Sasha said it, not me.
No. I'm just saying that the likelihood of that hitting 500 grand is much smaller than something else that's maybe, at the 50K range right now and like kind of soft going up to 75.
No, I know. I was just giving you a hard time. Even
Don't fuck with me.
even after the recent auction for the Tropical 2915.
Oh God! So I just did a YouTube video on that subject. That's a whole different category.
Yeah. Dude, so I was gonna bid on that. I was like, because you posted like a teaser.
I saw the watch and I didn't think it was nice enough. There was a scratch on the dial and some things that I didn't like about the watch. So my brother and I were just kind of, it's not for us. I didn't expect much, and since I wasn't bidding on it and I wasn't the consigner, I was across the street. So Phillips auction happens in a tent, in a big tent in the center parking area that's built on top of a parking area at La Reserve Hotel in Geneva. And so you walk across into the lobby and then you can have like coffee, drinks or whatever. And often we take a break and we just kind of go. So I was having a beer with a couple friends, and then somebody comes like running up to me and being like, "Is this yours?" I'm like, what are you talking about? And it's like, "Is this Speedmaster yours? It just hit $1 million." I'm like, "Excuse me?" So he like shows me his phone. He was watching, so he was having a drink also for this friend of mine, Sergio, and he was watching it live and just comes up to me. He's like, "Look at the video, like it's at $1 million." And I'm like, "Oh wow, maybe I should get back there and like see what's going on." So put my beer down, beeline back to Phillips auction house tent, walk in there, and it was already at like $2 million at this point. And so there were 3 bidders, one through the telephones in Hong Kong from China, one from the Middle East. I never remember if it was Oman or Bahrain, and because Adam and I remembered that differently, that I think was bidding online. And then at some point in the middle there was some bidder from San Antonio, Texas, that nobody's been able to figure out who in the universe that was, that like I was at the 1.5 million point. So we were kind of confused that there was actually 3 bidders, let alone one, let alone anybody bidding this high. But from what we understood, these are 2 extremely competitive bidders, the Middle Eastern guy and the Chinese bidder, that also fought over the Omega Tourbillon, which had at the time also set a record for an Omega, I think at 1.6 million. That went like well above, I think it was estimated like 100 to 200,000, and it sold for like 1.6 million all in. So it was like, it made a lot of noise, and it was these same 2 guys. And I think they just, I don't know how they pick, or like how they even end up fighting over a watch like that and like going so absurdly high. What annoyed me, to be very honest, is that if that watch had done 350,000, it would have been healthy for the market. But the fact that it went to 3.5 million, people become extremely skeptical and suspicious of any, like, it's just not even a valid result. It's a total fluke. And so I don't even think it had a positive impact on the market. I've heard that tropical 2915s and 2998s probably took like a little 10% jump, 10-20% jump. I know people, offering them to me like, oh, I'm not influenced by the result, but like, would you be interested? Would you be interested in like 500,000? And I'm like, no, I'm not interested in 500,000.
What did you have it? What was your estimate of what it was supposed to?
So I told my brother I thought I was going to do about, like, I would be very impressed and happy if it did 350,000 all in.
Oh, okay.
And it did 10 times that.
Okay.
So, but auctions were tough this time for dealers. Most of the dealers I was with did not win a single watch. Auctions have become not only retail, but also just people get carried away. I think that like it's just like thrill seeking at some point. Doesn't make very much sense to us when there are watches on the open market that are worth. Some watches are very rare, like the Cartier Crash.
Yeah.
It's been heading that way, but for it to sell for 805,000 Swiss francs, that's close to $1 million. Kind of blew me away. And a client of mine had been looking for a Crash 2 years ago. And I told him, I'm like, you have a big wrist. I think that might be a little bit small on you. And he's like, yeah, but it's a good investment. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe.
It was about 120 at the time.
He had one offered for 90K. And I was like, I don't know, 90K, it's a small watch and whatever. So it goes to show you what I know. I am not a financial advisor in any way whatsoever. And luckily, he's forgotten all about that and does not give me grief.
So I kind of interrupted you before you told your other great story about your greatest find.
So this is a watch that we've shown absolutely no one. That's in my, well, maybe like 2 friends have seen this watch. And the Omega Museum included, or additionally. And so the story goes that a watch dealer and very close friend of Roy and I was at a small watch show near Orlando, Florida, and bought a Speedmaster for a few $1,000s that he quickly turned around, like he had looked at it and had some engravings on the back, and he just like paid the guy, you're talking about a guy who was like taking watches out of a plastic bag and was like, oh, that's interesting, I'll take that, here, 3K, done. Then he sends us pictures and we're like, please don't do anything with that watch until we can talk. So fast forward a bit, he gets the watch opened, we get the serial number, we get better pictures, we start talking to the museum, and my brother and I know that we want this watch bad. And we know that he bought it so cheaply that convincing him to sell it to us when he's actually a watch dealer, it was going to be almost impossible to coax it out of him. And when we met with him, he's like, I want to keep this for my kids. This is like a really important watch. And we then proceeded to offer him 6 figures.
Okay.
Condition, with the single condition that we get confirmation from NASA that this watch is not like one of the ones that they can come after us for. So we did back channel talk through Omega Museum and the head of equipment at the time for the Apollo missions with, who's Jim Regan, to check that this watch hadn't been flown. So that was the first thing, because any flown watch, it's game over. The watch has not only the part number, but a serial number. So it's an issued NASA watch that was sold at surplus. Only 2 of these are known. My client in the UK has the other. And was never flown. So it was used for training exercises. It was like kind of the one that they didn't bring with them on the mission, but one that they would use during training on Earth. So as close as we can ever get, and we will ever get to owning, a NASA astronaut watch. What's also cool about ours is that it's only a few numbers away from Michael Collins's 145012. Okay. So he was on the Apollo 11 mission. He's not one of the 2 famous guys. So Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin that actually went on the moon. He was he was keeping the car running while they were landing on the moon, basically. Yeah. So he was going around the moon while they were landing on the moon. But he was on the Apollo 11 mission, and this one is like same reference and 5 numbers away.
Oh wow.
So it's that Apollo era watch, and it was used apparently for Apollo training exercises, Skylab, and then shuttle missions before being sold to surplus.
That's freaking cool.
Yeah. So
that's really cool.
So that is the Hope Diamond of our collection, and one that we will eventually have a huge argument over who, because you can't split that watch up. Yeah. So the only way I could see us selling that watch is because at some point or another, neither of us are ever going to agree on the value of this watch, and how do we split it up between 2 brothers? So that's one of my favorite stories of watch hunting in terms of like owning a watch like that. Is kind of like it's an end game watch that came kind of early on. We had to borrow all the money to buy that watch from like family, and we then like slowly paid it back, whatever. But we had to have this watch.
That's odd. There's a part of me that really wants to get into like Grail stories like that. But I'm really glad that you had an opportunity to get your Grail. It's kind of like your Indiana Jones of the watch world.
Correct.
Kinda.
Yes.
I mean, or
it evolved less like snakes, but it was quite the adventure. And it's something that I'm kind of like really proud of. But it set the benchmark from there, like in terms of like Grail finds, tough. We've had some really cool stories of watches, some incredible Speedmasters also, racing Speedmasters that came from original owners, things like that we also love. But it set the mark pretty high for us in terms of what we could be hunting out there.
How do you even keep anything then? Like, considering you guys both have that, right, in your collection, how do you? And we've talked about this. I've actually asked you for advice on what watches to keep and how you can keep watches in your personal collection. And so when you have a Grail piece already, how do you even keep other stuff?
Okay, so every watch is different. I think that watch, if you look at it from the front, it's not the most exciting, I guess.
Okay. It's
100% the issued, because it's a standard 145012, so 321 Speedmaster. When we bought it was head only. We put it on like a NATO strap, but I've worn it at collector get-togethers where people didn't give it even like a second look. We're like, oh, well, whatever.
That's weird. It's weird too.
So it's like the ultimate stealth wealth watch, but at the same time, like there's watches that I enjoy wearing maybe more, that are more like exciting in terms of like the actual aesthetics of it. but in terms of like the story and the issued and the provenance of that watch, it's the number one. Because when you look at when you look at military or issued, so forget military, just issued watches, let's say, when you look at what the astronauts were in terms of qualifications, you had like, okay, so you have watches issued to the Army, like Air Force, Navy, but these were like the best of all these things that were then recruited to be astronauts were at like above. And so even if you look at like Comex divers, there's been astronauts that did like, that were, they went from space to deep sea and, everything in between. And so I think that the astronaut issued watch is the ultimate, for me personally, is the ultimate grail. There are watches that you're allowed to sell. Every astronaut has like a certain amount of weight of things that they can bring up with them on missions, and then they can keep that stuff afterwards. And that's the stuff that you see like coming up for, auction. If anything has been flown, it was a private watch that they brought with them. And one of your local guys has a really cool flown.
The Movado.
Correct.
Has
a really cool flown watch.
That's a great story. We might have to do something and.
So that's a really interesting story,
Yeah, that's
and
great.
he's free and clear to own that because it's private. I mean, it came from the daughter of the astronaut, and so that's just great,
Yeah.
I'm talking about the actual issued stuff, where none of it is accessible, and only 2 of these watches exist, and the other one is never, never going anywhere. So we'll see. My brother and I might just be buried with, with this watch. That might be that.
But what's your favorite independent
Watchmaker?
Yeah.
Okay, so the one that I connect with the most is Recep Recepi, who the brand is Akrivia. He got his start, or he started, basically branching out on his own around the same year that my brother and I did. And I remember like distinctly like seeing him outside of Basel World, like with the drawings of like his first watch and his original prototype on the wrist, and like, kind of launching his brand. He also works with his brother. And his workshop is actually like just around the corner, like down the street from us.
Yeah.
So it's just been interesting to see him kind of evolve side by side, 2 different worlds, but like kind of evolve at the same time. So I kind of connect with his story, following along. And since he released his chronometer, Contemporain,
Excuse what?
it's shortened to like, I think RRCC.
What'd you say though?
It's Chronomètre Contemporain,
Oh, okay.
which means like a contemporary chronometer in French, and RR Recep Recepi. Since he released that watch, the first watches he released were more like modern and like, very kind of aggressive looking cases, incredible movement work. The second series that he's done now is more classic and elegant, I would say. And I told him, I just sat down with him recently, and I told him, in a couple years I'm turning 40, so I should be having a more kind of like, dress watch to own. All my entire collection is all sports watches.
Yeah.
And I'm in my 30s, and I started collecting when I was in my 20s, so that kind of made sense. But I think at some point I'm like, I'm gonna need a dress watch. Okay, so let's just go with the quantity of watches he makes a year. He makes 40 to 50 watches, and he's taken his machining and all the tools that he uses to make these watches and gone back in time. So he's actually slower to produce them, just using like more traditional techniques.
Yeah.
So he has no want whatsoever to increase production.
Yeah.
Journe makes between like 700 to 900 watches a year. And they've got wait lists on everything now. He's at like 40, 50 watches, and the RRCC2, I don't know if it's CCRR2 or RRCC2, so the new model that he just launched is, I think, like 67 or 68,000 Swiss, and maybe 70. Correct. There's also the Akrivia stuff what I was talking about was more.
Oh, those are two different brands.
It's the same brand. I think they're like a little bit separate quotas, but generally I think he's only making like 50, 60 watches a year total. So it's not.
Want one.
So yeah, so people reach out to me and they're like, oh, you're friends with him. I saw that you were like, your brother was having lunch with him and so on and so forth. Can you ask about a watch for us too?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what, me, like Mr. Vintage has no clue about any of this stuff, like walked in. So I sat down with him and I was like, do you guys have like a waiting list? He's like, we don't have a waiting list anymore. It's just like, we're so far beyond sold out that I think if he like really had a waiting list, it would be like 10 to 20 years or something like that. It's like ridiculous. So he's hand picking who he's delivering every single watch to.
That's so sick,
and
dude.
he has very few partners, one of which one of his biggest fans along the way is, and I think his distributor for Singapore, or his retailer for Singapore, is Mike Tay from Hourglass. And so he's doing it the right way. He's doing it exactly how he wants. He has like zero pressure.
Just for final questions, how often do you shave your arms for wrist shots?
So I trim a little bit, just so the hair.
Okay.
But only under here, so that
Alright.
because I get really annoyed and I have my photographer like edit out the little hairs that like then like curl across. I don't have like a Chewbacca wrist,
Yeah.
so
You don't gotta trim, just be proud.
what of the little it annoys me. Is this another More Watches comment?
No.
Because he's like obsessed with like wrist hair
No,
and like all that stuff.
No.
So yeah, there's like tsunamis of hair on watches that I've seen on Instagram accounts.
Okay.
And it's and they get comments like pretty interesting comments. So a guy who has a hairy wrist or whatever, I don't know where I saw this. I have to think about the name, but he had a comment on his wall asking like, oh, that's cute. Like you put the watch on like your dog's wrist. so he gets it hard, and so I get that, but it's like an exaggerated case. It looks like a tidal wave like of hair going over the watch. But yeah, I think that like at some point, being a full-time or part-time, wrist model, I have to kind of groom a little bit the area.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in to Sasha Gray.
It's been a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. It was a huge pleasure. So thank you actually for the Sasha Gray video ended up
Happy
better.
endings all around.
Ended up better than I thought. So thank you so much, Sasha. This was now I don't have to fly to Switzerland to see you, right?
Yeah, saves you money, saves me time. It's great.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, thanks everyone.